because of the psychedelic renaissance, people are hopeful because we see these new research centers opening up for psychedelics and consciousness. UCSF, Columbia, NYU, I mean, all over. It's crazy how many centers are being opened. And I think psychedelics are interesting because so a lot of this like receptivity to, let's say, the symbolic nature of the universe really comes through what we call altered states of consciousness, such as being on a psychedelic or being in a dream state or in that state between sleep and wake, that moment but when you're about to fall asleep, but you're not fully asleep and you're not fully awake. All of those states there's like a range of consciousness. And it's believed that when you move into the more liminal states, these between and betwixt states, that you have access to more information, other kinds of information. So the fact that, and a lot of weird things happen on psychedelics, a lot of these, intuitive visions, people feel like they can hear other people's thoughts and emotions. They'll see spirits, they'll claim. And a lot of people come out of psychedelic trips not believing in materialism anymore. They come out saying plants have consciousness, the universe is conscious, there are spirits, consciousness survives death. And those are, interestingly enough, that's a lot of the things that you hear in spiritual traditions and a lot of indigenous cultures. So there's a lot of commonality that you hear from people when they come out of these states. And so because of the psychedelic renaissance, I am more hopeful that people are opening their minds, because they can't ignore, as we move into this venture capital backed, FDA approved, psychedelics for mental health space, you're going to have a bunch of people coming out of these states flipped. They're going to flip their worldview and come out, and we can't just ignore them. We can't ignore that, because that's not going to help them integrate back what they've learned, right? Integrate everything into a sense of wholeness, or even integrate back into society. Like, we can't just leave them. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I understand that mushrooms are being experimented with by researchers now, as far as people getting off cocaine, they're doing mushrooms, and they're, for instance, more likely to stay off of it. And businessmen and so forth go on a trip on them and totally change their perspectives after. I've never tried them, but what's the theory behind that? Just as what you were saying, it opens your mind to a different side of reality, or
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different theories. If you want this, the spiritual, indigenous, I would say, side is, yes, these states give you access to a different level of information. If you want the neuroscience explanation, it's that these, which it's probably not either or, right? It's probably both, but a neuroscience psychology explanation of what happens on these substances is that they essentially, your brain has these networks that it's very used to using, right? Your brain gets used to processing and thinking in a very specific way. And because to save energy, your brain never changes that. So that's why we get stuck in these behavioral patterns, stuck in these thought patterns. So when you take a psychedelic, though, what it does is it breaks open those connections, and it allows the other parts of the brain to connect. So parts that usually don't talk to each other, and then the parts that usually do talk to each other separate. And so that's why when you take a psychedelic, sometimes it's like, I can taste a sound, or I can or taste a color or something, because all of your brain is kind of rewiring. And that gives you new psychological perspectives. It gives you new views on experience. The whole world changes for you. And so when you come back, you bring those insights back with you. A lot of times, the reason they're healing too is because they allow access to things that you usually suppress. Like if you have a severe trauma, that your ego and your conscious mind doesn't want to deal with on a regular basis, and you never think about it, right? So your behavioral thought pattern is, no, we're not going to touch that because it's too painful. But when you go on a psychedelic, you're in a different state and you are allowed access to that. So you can bring up this trauma and work through it in a, if you're in a safe setting with a therapist or someone who's trained to guide you through it. You can work through it and you kind of release that weight, like that burden that's been on you. You release the energy, you release the neural connection. And that's how it helps people heal. It can bring like a new way of thinking about it. Like, oh, that was something bad that happened to me, but it's over now and I processed it. And then you just move on. So that's the neuroscience psychology explanation for it. Yeah, that's a few different ways to look at it.
Now, I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but you did talk about psychedelics. Do you recommend people go? I know here, even though mushrooms are illegal, there's mushroom shops. Weed
Yeah.
is legal in Canada. Like, how would you recommend someone go about it if they wanted to experiment with that? Which I
Yeah.
don't know if you could even answer or not, but
I definitely do not recommend that you just do them. I think, as I mentioned, sometimes when you take a psychedelic, it can release something you've been suppressing, and sometimes that's a trauma. And it's not always helpful if a trauma just comes up if you don't have the support to process it. So I do always recommend, and plus, honestly, you never know if you're going to get a good or a bad trip. So it's always good to like have a good guide or a therapist with you who's experienced, who can, walk you through it, guide you through the experience, and can help you process whatever happens. Sometimes you see things and experience things that you can't make sense of, and it's so helpful to have somebody, especially someone who's super trained to guide you through it. And I think that, it's legal in Oregon. It's becoming legal in Colorado. It's becoming legal. So I think in the future, I think it'll be easier to like travel to places where it's legal and get the kind of support that you need. Hopefully, I don't think that's very far off.